Dricus Du Plessis just executed a game plan to perfection against a very dialed in and looking sharp Israel Adesanya. Kai Kara France gets an absolutely nasty, shocking KO, at least to me, over Steve Erceg. Psycho Dan, Tattoo Dan, whatever you want to call him, was on full display last night as he went to war with Mateusz Gamrot. Jairzinho Rozenstruik cruises to a decision over Tai Tuivasa, and Carlos Prates just continues to impress as I think he is a future star inside the UFC. UFC 305 is in the books, ladies and gentlemen, and now I'm going to be giving my full card recap for this event. And if you're looking for my full in-depth breakdown on DDP versus Izzy, I made a separate video for that I will link down in the description. But man, first I want to say, UFC 305, one of the best events of the year. UFC 305 was absolutely spectacular. I feel like every time the UFC goes to Perth, Western Australia, we get an unbelievable card. And this card had a little bit of everything. It had submissions, it had knockouts, it had some controversy. It had absolutely everything, and we really flew through this card. I mean, we normally, I'm up till, way past 1 a.m., sometimes 2 a.m. here in the U.S., and on Eastern time. And I mean, this thing ended pretty early. And that is a testament to how fast-paced and exciting this card was, because we don't have that happen unless we have quite a bit of finishes. So there was a lot of great things that happened on this card. I'm excited to discuss this. I will put the timestamps down below. So if there's specific fights you want to hear me discuss, there you go. But if you're a real one, watch the whole thing. Let's hop right into this. First fight of the night, Stuart Nicoll and Jesus Aguilar. I thought Stuart Nicoll was going to have a successful debut. This was set up perfectly for him in Australia in front of his fan base, and we just saw, I should have known better, man. Whenever you get a guy who's on the regional scene who, even if they are undefeated and they are looking great, whenever they get that first test inside the UFC against a guy who's had a few fights in the organization already, it's a tough task. It's a tough task. And people, when we look at it, we're like, well, this guy's got a great skill set, but there's those outside factors that tend to play a role. And Jesus Aguilar sinking in a nasty guillotine and able to submit Stuart Nicoll. I mean, Jesus Aguilar dominated this fight. I mean, Stuart Nicoll, it was about as bad as a debut could go, to be quite honest with you. Cutting through the shit, it was as bad of a debut as you can really hope for. I know it was a big step up in competition for him, but that's not how they saw that thing going. And you had to know coming into this, Stuart, that Jesus Aguilar's best weapon is the guillotine. He had an overhand right that he landed on Shannon Ross, but outside of that was kind of an anomaly. It was the guillotine, and that's what he resorts to in order to get things done. So good performance by Jesus Aguilar. That was a big win for him because a lot of people were high on Stuart Nicoll coming into this fight. Jesus Aguilar stole the hype and kind of stole the show immediately to start the card. So that ruined a lot of perfect predictions for a lot of people if you were trying to predict the whole night correctly. So a great performance by Jesus Aguilar. Moving on. Song Kenan versus Ricky Glenn. I went with Song Kenan in this fight, and this fight pretty much went how I imagined it to be. Look, Ricky Glenn, he's a solid fighter. He's a veteran. He's been around for a while, but his striking is very basic. He doesn't really provide any type of danger. I know he landed a couple good shots on Song early in the fight, but as the fight kind of played out, we saw Ricky have some success in the first round. He was able to get a takedown, but then the hematoma, and he started to just get battered as Song Kenan started to wear a little bit of fatigue. But both guys, man, two older guys inside the UFC. They've been around for a while. I like when the UFC does that. They match up guys that are kind of in the same area of their career to where they're older, they're kind of past their prime for sure, and don't throw them in there with these contenders anymore. Give them winnable matchups. This is what that fight was. This was a good back and forth. I mean, Song Kenan, he started to get very tired, and we saw Ricky Glenn get very tired, but Song was able to dig deep, and he just started landing a lot of good clean shots. He almost had Ricky out of there at some moments. I thought he was going to be able to get him out of there, but it shows how tough Ricky is. And Song Kenan, he looked very good. And like I said, coming into this fight, this was a great matchup for Song because he had been in there with guys like Ian Gary, and he had been in there with some really good fighters in his past couple outings. So this was a step back in competition for him, a guy that was more in line with where he's at in his career. Good performance by Song Kenan. Moving on. Tom Nolan, Alex Reyes. I'm going to be critical here. Look, I think Tom Nolan's a very good fighter, and I think that he put on a good showing. I think that he showed great pressure, great pace, great cardio, and he's shown that he's a very long-ranging guy for the weight class. He's got good striking. He has some pretty good grappling of his own, but I'm disappointed in what we saw. I mean, look, Alex Reyes is a solid fighter. We know that he has a good finishing ability, but he's a veteran and he's not a guy. Look, the UFC was trying to give Tom Nolan a big moment to shine, and I think he did. Don't get me wrong. But there's a lot to learn here for Tom Nolan, in my opinion, because he was landing a lot of good shots at range, but for some reason, he just kept crashing forward into range against Reyes, negating that range, and that's where Reyes was having the success, was when Tom Nolan was not staying at bay. He was landing a lot of good shots at range, and then he would come crashing in, and then Reyes was able to get a hold of him, stall him up against the fence, take him down, land some good shots in close, to where if you're Nolan, just sit on the outside and pick him apart. And then if you do hurt him, stop rushing in, throwing a bunch of spinning shit, because it never worked. Every time you did it, Reyes was able to duck underneath, get to a body lock, take your back, put you up against the fence, and recover and kind of stall the fight. And I just thought that, yes, Tom Nolan did get a win. And yes, I'm happy he got the win because I think he's a very good fighter. This is a learning experience for him. But nonetheless, like I said, the pace, the pressure, the output, and he just didn't get tired in there. He was in outstanding condition. So nonetheless, good performance by Tom Nolan. But like I said, a couple things that I think he'll improve on as he goes here in the UFC, because again, he's relatively still green in the organization. Moving on. Jack Jenkins and Herbert Burns. I told you, man, a guy with a mustache and a mullet, you can't bet against him, man. Look, Herbert Burns, in all fairness, he looked way better than I think what most of us thought. I mean, Herbert, in the first round at least too, his striking looked pretty good. He was very keen to the leg kicks that Jack Jenkins was going to be throwing. He was very light on that lead leg. He checked some of them, got his leg out of the way. But Jenkins was ultimately able to get to that calf. He landed some good leg kicks. The boxing of, I was like, Jack Della Jenkins? Is that Jack Della Maddalena in there? Because the boxing was outstanding of Jack Jenkins. He was going to the body. He was mixing things up. He was throwing that good liver shot. And he just eventually started to break Herbert Burns. And from what we've seen throughout the career of Herbert Burns, unfortunately, when someone shows you who they are, you have to believe them. And what we've seen from Herbert is a guy that once you start to kind of get to him, he folds. He folds, and we saw that last night. Jack Jenkins, man, that was a very, very good performance. Like I said, Herbert, he looked better than he did in some of his other fights. He secured a couple takedowns, and I was worried because anytime Herbert Burns has you on the ground and he's in a dominant position on top, even on bottom, it's dangerous because he's got really, really good submissions. But Jack Jenkins, absolutely great. It's a really good performance. It's a good performance because you got a motivated Herbert coming into this fight, considering his back to the wall. I don't know if we see Herbert again in the UFC, to be honest with you. But Jack Jenkins, put some respect on this guy's name. He says he wants, I think, Gavin Tucker next in November. Add that fight, man, because I love that matchup because Jack is a guy that I think the UFC is going to continue to build because every time they come to Australia, he's a guy that fans are going to be showing up for because he is a fun guy to watch every single time. Great performance by Jenkins. Moving on. Casey O'Neill, Luana Santos. And I did pick Jack Jenkins to win that fight. I figured that's kind of how that fight was going to go. But Casey O'Neill, Luana Santos. I thought Casey O'Neill this fight played out pretty much to what I was expecting, where it was, look, if Luana Santos is going to get this done, considering she took it on relatively short notice, she had a fight before, she's cutting weight again, has to fly all the way over to Australia. There was a lot of factors kind of riding on this, but she does have good judo. But again, judo at times can be a little overrated in MMA if you're not able to tack in some of the other grappling aspects onto it and add some of the ground and pound and some of those other things. And I've just seen too many holes from Luana Santos when it comes to the striking, to where I thought Casey O'Neill, yes, she's coming off some L's. Yes, she's coming off of a layoff. But she's ranked for a reason. She has good striking. She has good rhythm. And the volume and the output was going to be a little bit much for Luana, to where if Santos wasn't able to get her out of there early, which I didn't see happening, Casey was going to take over and her volume was going to get to her. So that's exactly what we saw. Really good performance by Casey O'Neill. One of the best. I mean, to come off a couple L's, come off of a layoff, injuries, come back and look like that. Great performance by Casey O'Neill. Moving on. Ricardo Ramos and Josh Culibao. I almost threw something through the TV at this fight. This was, and I know I'm kind of like joking here, this fight pissed me the fuck off. Like, I'm being honest, man. As a guy who trains in martial arts, a guy who loves the fight game, Josh Culibao displayed some of the worst fight IQ I've ever seen inside the UFC last night. It was It was so frustrating to me because you're on, I believe, what is it, a 2-fight skid? Josh Culibao, you needed a win. You come in here against Ricardo Ramos, who, he's a solid fighter. He's a very winnable fight. He does have some pretty good striking. You beat up the calf. You had the guy hurt. He could barely move. So what do? You come rushing in and load up and throw a big old leg kick underneath. Like the guy, his first instinct when his leg is hurt is to defend the leg. Why are you not feinting that and then trying to utilize the boxing, knowing that Ricardo does have grappling in his back pocket that he's going to try to resort to? And not only did he resort to it, you lost the round. You hurt the guy. I mean, in my opinion, I thought you lost the round. And clearly the judges kind of saw the same thing because he was able to take your back and almost sink in a rear naked choke. And all fair play to Josh. He put himself in a horrible position. He was able to defend it. I thought that he was cooked. He was able to get through it. Comes out. He's landing some good shots. He was getting the better of a lot of the striking exchanges. But then he's out there dancing and doing all this stuff, acting like he's just coasting through the fight, like he didn't just give away damn near the first round, but having a lapse there. And then comes out in the third round and you get out grappled. There was no urgency to get back to your feet. I know it's easier said than done. Very, very frustrating performance if you're a fan of watching Josh Culibao. I picked him to win the fight, and he could have won this fight. And I know that people were like, oh, it was a robbery, it was close, it was this and that. Look, if Josh Culibao fought intelligently in the first round, he had the guy's leg hurt. If he was patient and he threw good, clean shots down the middle like we saw him land on Ramos, he started to get wild, and that's where everything started to go south in each round. Whenever you saw Culibao technical, it was going well. When you saw him start to get reckless, that's where the round started to go towards Ricardo Ramos. Very disappointing on the side of Josh Culibao. And in my opinion, even if you thought it was close, he didn't deserve to win the fight. He didn't deserve to win it. Made too many damn errors in there. Is that in there showboating, acting like he's coasting through the fight like it wasn't close. Just very disappointing in terms of Josh Culibao. But nonetheless, good performance by Ricardo Ramos. Guy didn't go away. He implemented the grappling. He had Josh in a lot of danger when he was able to take his back. But back and forth, that was a pretty good fight as well. Moving on. We have Walter Walker and Junior Tafa. We had a little controversy here because, Junior Tafa, if you're just standing in front of the Tafa brothers, you're going to be in trouble because they have good striking. That's what they're known for. But one of my concerns coming into this is, has Junior Tafa solved anything in terms of the grappling? And tonight showed us no, he hasn't made any improvements in terms of the wrestling. But a credit to Walter Walker. The guy's got really good wrestling. He's got really good grappling. And he's kind of looking like a problem in this division. I know that Junior Tafa doesn't have the best takedown defense. But when you have a guy with a pace and pressure in that style of grappling like Walter Walker, that's hard to deal with, especially, when you're, with the big boys in there, man, because they tend to get a little tired. Walter Walker, advances to 12-1 now. Really, really good performance. We had some controversy because, he starts to go for a submission, Walker does, and Junior Tafa, as he's rolling over, he screams, or whatever he said, and the ref took that as a verbal submission, which if you look it up, that's technically a verbal submission. Ref stops it, so, Junior Tafa slaps Walker after the fight, so that was definitely interesting because you had, all that time to do something to him in there. I don't get that after, but nonetheless, I like the Tafa brothers, but you got to give Walker his credit. That was a very, very good performance by Walter Walker, and it was like, look, if it stays on the feet, Tafa's going to do very well. If it goes to the grappling, Walker's going to dominate this fight, and it was a very cut and dry kind of matchup in my opinion, and it played out that way. Moving on to the main card, we have Carlos Prates and Li Jingliang. I can't wait to talk about this fight, man. Look, Carlos Prates, I picked him to win by finish. And a lot of folks were out there saying, look, the Leech has never been finished. And he's never been finished. It ain't going to happen, man. His kryptonite is only being subbed and this and that. And I said, look, Carlos is a different dude on the feet, man. This guy has the it factor. He has the superstar qualities that can turn this guy into a big name inside the UFC. And what that is he's good on the microphone, he's got the look, he's got the swag, and he has the fighting style. This man is an absolute problem in this division. It's an absolute problem. This was a big step up in competition in my eyes for Carlos. I mean, goes in there against the Leech, who is not a pushover. I mean, the Leech is coming off a 2-year layoff, which I was worried that was going to affect him in this fight. But he looked pretty good. He looked like he was in pretty good condition coming off that fight over D-Rod at UFC 279, where a lot of us felt like the Leech won that. And then Prates, he's just been on a hot streak. He's got really, really good Muay Thai technique. You saw it. When the Leech started to throw those leg kicks, he got real light on that lead leg, started with that traditional, Thai style, hands up, bouncing that leg, getting it out of the way. His striking, his hands are very, very fast. His kicks are fast. He's got good knees up the body, which I figured anytime the Leech would try to come crashing in, he would deter him away with knees. He would deter him away with speed. Carlos Prates, not only is his striking outstanding, his defense was on point. He was shoulder rolling, moving around, getting out of the way. This guy is different. And when he landed on Li, man, the reactions that we were seeing from the Leech, like we've never seen that. The power of Prates just must be different. I know he's a long-rangey guy, and those guys, man, they tend to have a lot of snap on their shots. We saw that with Prates. I am beyond impressed with this guy. I'm very high on him, and I predicted him to get this finish. And I know that a lot of people were like, look, the Leech is tough and this and that, but it's different when you're in there with a guy that has the tools and the capabilities that Carlos does, the variety of the striking, the way he mixes it up, the snap on the shots, the defense, floating in and out of range. Guy's very, very dangerous, man. And he said he wants Chaos Williams next. I love that fight. That tells you everything you need to know about Carlos Prates. And that's another thing that can turn you into a star. Anytime, anywhere, calls out Chaos Williams, who's I don't even know if Chaos is ranked right now off the top of my head. He's a very dangerous fight. He's got good power in his hands. He brings it every time. That's a firefight. I hope the UFC books that maybe before the end of the year. That's an amazing matchup. I think Prates would win that fight. That's a great, great matchup before we can see him start to get into the rankings. Nonetheless, I'm buying stock in Carlos Prates. I'm high on the guy. That was an unbelievable performance. And that was a highlight of the night for me. Moving on. Between the big fellas, we had Jairzinho Rozenstruik and Tai Tuivasa. Split decision. Nothing was split about this. That judge, he got relieved of his duties after scoring at 30-27 Tai Tuivasa. Now look, the only way that could have happened is if this dude was in the bathroom taking a piss break, or if he just put the wrong name on the scorecards. I don't know how in the world you could score that. Or Ty's family that was back there actually scored the fight, because that was clearly a victory for Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Clearly. I mean, if you would have gave Ty a round, okay, whatever, that was clearly a victory for Jairzinho Rozenstruik. And it kind of went how a lot of us saw this going. Look, Jairzinho, if you don't pressure him and you don't overwhelm him, he's just going to pick you apart. He's just going to sit there and play that very kickboxing style where he just kind of moves around. He looks very sluggish and slow in there, Bigi boy, but it's like the kicks come up fast, the jab is fast, and he's kind of lethargic in there, but it works. He's been in there. He's had numerous kickboxing fights. He's very comfortable. Every time Ty would come crashing forward, you saw that's where Ty's at his most dangerous, because he has crazy power. He definitely had the power advantage in this fight, and you saw Rozenstruik give him that respect and kind of lay back like, okay, I can't get reckless here. But every time Ty came crashing forward, Jairzinho would just clinch him up, circle off, and get away. And that was a brilliant game plan by Jairzinho. He fought behind the jab, just picked and poked at him with the kicks, frustrated Ty. But in all fairness, I actually thought Tai Tuivasa looked pretty good. I know he didn't win this fight, but he was very patient. He wasn't overly reckless. He was, loading up on those leg kicks. Like I said, he telegraphs the hell out of those because he tries to throw them with too much power, to where a guy like Bigi Boy, who has been a kickboxer all his life, he's going to be able to see that and get out of the way, which he was. He was just able to pick him apart and kept scoring with that jab, landing some good shots to the body. But Tuivasa, in all fairness, man, he looked better than I expected. But if Jairzinho was going to win this fight, I saw it kind of going to a decision, because Ty is tough. He was going to have to be cautious considering the power of Tuivasa. As a fight fan, very good performance by Rozenstruik, but my heart, man, it was sad to see Ty lose again, because he's on a skid here. He's a fun personality. I know Australia, every time they go, the pop that he receives, he's a fan favorite. But good performance by Rozenstruik. I'll be curious to see what matchup has next for him, because now he just beat Tuivasa, who was ranked number 10. So that's back-to-back big wins. A win over the Blob, Shamil Gaziev, and then a win over Tai Tuivasa, a dangerous opponent who was motivated with his back to the wall in this fight. Good performance by Bigi Boy. Moving on to what I thought was just fight of the night, man. Dan Hooker versus Mateusz Gamrot. This fight was crazy, right? And I know that this was a split decision, and there were some people out there that scored it For Gamrot, there were some people that scored it for Hooker. I could have seen it going either way because, look, Dan Hooker, he landed the more significant shots, in my opinion. And Dan Hooker's got a lot of scar tissue. He started to bleed. So I could have seen how you could have scored this for either guy because Gamrot's striking looked really, really good at the start of the fight. He clipped Hooker with some good shots. I'm like, wow, Gamrot looks good. And then the typical Gamrot, man, gets caught with a shot by Dan Hooker, gets dropped, and I'm like, here we go. And then he's, diving for the legs, and he was having a lot of success with the grappling. But whenever he would get back to his feet, those guys at City Kickboxing, they know once you get done with the grappling, they put you on your heels right away and start to let the combinations fly. And Psycho Dan came out, man. Blonde-headed, Eminem-era tattooed Dan. He went to absolute war, man. He was not going to lose tonight. He was not going to be denied. You saw the will of Dan Hooker. And that is a huge win for Dan Hooker. I mean, that is a huge win considering he was ranked number 11. Gamrot was ranked number 5. Getting a victory like this, he basically cracks inside the top 5. I would love to see a rematch with Dustin Poirier or Justin Gaethje versus Dan Hooker next because Hooker, in my opinion, taking on a matchup like Gamrot, who is that's a hard style to prepare for. A guy that is going to relentlessly come after you with the wrestling. He was doing a very good job defending the takedowns. Gamrot, even though he was securing some of the takedowns, he wasn't doing a whole lot with them. Hooker was never really in any danger. That was an unbelievable fight. Very high-paced, action-packed. Great matchup, great matchmaking, to be honest with you, because I saw that I felt like Dan Hooker was going to have some success. I just thought that Gamrot was going to be able to control him a little bit better on the ground, but turns out Dan Hooker had the answers, man, just like he said in the lead up to this fight. But nonetheless, that was an unbelievable fight to watch. High pace, high pressure. I enjoyed watching that one. Moving on, co-main event. This was actually probably the biggest shocker of the evening to me, in all honesty. Look, Kai Kara-France, he's a very good striker. He's got good power in his hands. He's a shorter guy, compared to Steve Erceg. He was going to have to get on the inside, extend the combinations to get to him, and he did just that. Steve is a very intelligent fighter in there. He's got really good grappling. He's got good submissions. His boxing is outstanding. I've said I think he's one of the best boxers in the division. He's patient, fights behind the jab. And you saw Steve very, very patient. He knew about the power of Kara-France, and he was kind of starting to pick with the jab. And I was like, oh, Steve's getting out of range. He's starting to kind of get his rhythm and timing. And it turns out Kai was just kind of setting him up the whole time, throwing that right hand to the body, and then eventually stepped through, kind of like Michael Chandler, switched stances as he came forward through that looping overhand, and was able to catch Steve Erceg and put him down bad, and then was able to finish up with some ground and pound. That was an unbelievable performance by Kai Kara-France. I did not see that coming. I really didn't see that coming because I know Kai Kara-France is dangerous. I know he has good power. I know he has good striking. But considering the layoff, how good Steve Erceg has looked since he's been in the UFC, considering he just went neck and neck with Alessandro Pantoja in a title fight, to where that was a huge step up for Steve, and it showed us, to where a lot of us felt like Steve might have won that fight. It showed us how good Steve actually is. Goes out there neck and neck with Pantoja, and I'm like, this guy's so well-rounded. He's so skilled. I feel like he's going to give Kai some issues. Turns out, Kai had the answers, man. Kai had the answers, and credit to City Kickboxing and his coaches. They find the holes in your game, and they do their best to exploit them. Kai Kara-France, unbelievable performance. I think that the way the flyweight division is looking right now, I could see him being on deck for a possible title shot. I don't know who the UFC is going to book, for the flyweight strap next, but I could definitely see Kai Kara-France making a case, especially getting an impressive knockout over a guy who just fought for the title, and Steve Erceg. That was an incredible performance by Kai Kara-France. But I already broke this down in a video, but man, Dricus Du Plessis, unbelievable performance by him. And, credit to his coach, Mornay Visser, who I think is he should be the head coach of the year, in my opinion, in terms of the MMA community. I mean, the game plans, every time we see DDP fight, it's a very, very different guy. He does the same kind of stuff, but the way they win the fights, it always looks different. His style, it is all over the place. It's chaotic. It's a DDP style, man. It's something that I haven't seen. The way he's kind of just reckless at times, comes lunging in with his shots. I was like, oh boy, don't do that too long, because then Adesanya is going to be able to counter. But I heard DDP in the post-fight interview, in the post-fight presser, he's like, look, we knew we could blitz because that's a part of my game. Just don't do it for too long. They had the perfect game plan to mix in the grappling, be patient, utilize the leg kicks, mix up the head kicks, switch stances, give Izzy a lot of different looks. They did just that, because I got to be honest, man, That was the Izzy that I was expecting. I was expecting a very sharp and dialed in and aggressive Adesanya, and he looked mean tonight. Izzy looked absolutely mean. The way that he was throwing the kicks to the body, the leg kicks, I mean, everything had some extra steam on it. He was digging some shots to the body. His boxing looked really good, but it was just ultimately the pressure of Dricus Du Plessis, the well-roundedness of him that eventually just was able to get to Israel Adesanya. Unbelievable performance by Dricus Du Plessis. And like I said, the UFC said that, oh, Dana's up there like Strickland's next, but then he kind of walked back those comments in a later interview that he did, after the Contender Series, to where I feel like, yeah, it makes sense for Strickland considering the history they have, but if Robert Whittaker beats Khamzat Chimaev, that's a win over Costa, a win over Ikram, which he didn't, that was a huge risk for Whittaker to even continue to go through with that fight. Then now he says, I'm willing to take on Chimaev again. If he could get through Khamzat, that's 3 fights in a row that he's won. It would be hard to not give Whittaker the shot. I know that DDP was able to finish Whittaker, so that's kind of where it dampens, because Strickland, it was really close, and you could have made the argument that Strickland won. But again, if Khamzat's able to beat Robert Whittaker, I don't see a scenario in which they don't skip Strickland and give Khamzat the shot, considering how big of a star he is and how much they're trying to push him. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. The middleweight division finally heating up. It's been heating up, but man, it just feels quite a bit different. But nonetheless, great performance by DDP. And Izzy will be back, man. He looked motivated. He looked sharp. He looked good. He looked fast. It was just DDP had the answers. They had the perfect game plan, and his style is a problem. He's got power, he's got endurance, he's got speed, he's got it all. And his body language is deceiving in there. Sometimes you think he's tired, sometimes you think he's worn out, and then he just throws a big overhand and clips you. And he's an interesting guy to watch. So shout out to South Africa, man. Your guy got it done, and he is outstanding. And I don't know who's going to beat him, because he is so well rounded. I'm curious to see what they'll do next with him. But if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, comment your thoughts down below, subscribe to the channel, help your boy out. I would appreciate it. See you next time.